about the difference between top-down and bottom-up processing. So top-down processing, and by the way, if you can't see these slides, please speak out in the chat because otherwise it's just going to be me talking here. So top-down processing, first let's look at the term itself, top-down. We start with the top and we go downwards. Now what does that mean? We start with, in a way, the whole image, and then we break it down into individual units. We break it down into the elements that make up that particular object. So I have here, okay, so the slides are not viewable. Okay, let's see here. So is it just me you're seeing right now? So I just want to get this. Okay, so Angela, might be something about your screen, and maybe it might just be because you might have a setting because others are saying they can see it. So what I'm going to do here is I'll describe it in a way. Hopefully, okay. So some people can see me. All right. I wouldn't be able to tell you offhand only because what you see and what I see are different things. It might be you have something checked, like see if there's a settings menu where you are, because it seems like other people are able to view it. There's not much I can say about it right now. If anybody else who's watching has an idea, please feel free to contribute in the chat. Because don't want to preclude anyone from seeing these images. Not that they're the world's greatest images, not that I'm the world's greatest PowerPoint maker, but still, I'm going to talk about some of these issues here. So this first one, top-down processing. It's actually a picture of a cube, except it's not a cube. It's actually a series of circles with parts of the circles missing. And when they're arranged in such a way, it makes it look like there are the lines of a cube. In other words, a three-dimensional cube. But when you look at the details, you see that there aren't any lines at all that correspond to a cube. In other words, there is no cube there. But when it's presented to you immediately, you see a cube. Now, for those of you who can't see these slides here, I will give you another example that doesn't require looking at the slides here. So in other words, you see the whole image. I say, but wait a minute, are you really looking at a cube in this case? And you look at it carefully and say, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't seem to be right. So, okay, actually, no, I just thought of what I can do here is I can share, at least I think I can. I hope I don't mess everything up here. So I'm going to see if I can share this so that everyone can see this and follow along at home. So share and shareable link. So everyone can view, done. All right, let's do it this way. So Angela, hopefully you can follow along here. We can do that. All right. So if you need to see it there, you can go that way. And go back to present. All right. So hopefully now, okay. So hopefully the cube is back. Okay, you can see it now? Okay, good. So maybe I had to log out and log back in. All right. So again, you can see this cube, except there is no cube. It looks like there's a cube, but really there's not. So what's going on here? Well, as it turns out, there is no cube, but we have this whole image. But break it down to individual parts, look at the finer details, look at what makes up this cube, and you say, oh, wait, there really isn't a cube. You see, what you're doing here is that you see the whole image first, the top. You see the whole image first. Then you kind of break it down into individual elements. You say, oh, wait a minute, but now that I look at it a little bit more carefully, I see there's this, this one black circle in the upper right-hand corner. It looks like a white arrow that's in it. There's a circle, two circles in the middle. It looks like they have peace signs in them. And so put it all together, it just makes this kind of cube-looking thing. We see the whole image first, and then you break it down to fine details. If you look at art, if you're into painting especially, and you'll go to an exhibit and you see a painting that looks interesting to you, you see this whole image first, you see the painting as it is, and then you look at it a little bit more carefully, you look at it more closely, and you see the brush strokes, you see perhaps the different dyes or different colors of paint that were used to make the element that make that particular picture, as it were. So you're kind of starting with the whole image and you break it down to the individual elements. That's what we talk about with top-down processing. And again, if anyone has questions or something is not clear, please let me know. So that's top-down. Now, bottom-up is essentially the exact opposite. Bottom-up processing is where, in essence here, you look at the fine details, you look at the individual details, and you kind of come to a whole image, or you come to a whole conclusion, this is what it is, or whatever it might be. So, for example, bottom-up processing. Now, this is a classic little trick here. If I say read the sentence, okay, often people, if they're not careful, will say, I love Paris in the springtime. But when you look at it carefully, you realize that's not what it says. It actually says, I love Paris in the springtime. The word "the" is repeated, but the way it's set up is throws you off. Now, why I call this bottom-up processing? If I said to you, what's the problem with this sentence, besides the fact it's put into a triangle? I mean, forget that for a moment. What's the problem with this particular sentence? And so you have to look at it very carefully and say, all right, I see the word I see the word love, I see Paris. Oh, I see the problem. The word the is there twice. That's a type of bottom-up processing where you're looking at the specific details and you come to a conclusion as to what the whole image is. In a more classic analysis as to what bottom-up processing is, if I look at an image, let's say I hold up my hand, I say, look at my hand. What bottom-up processing would entail is you look at the curves of around my fingers, you look at the straightish-looking lines, you see the colors of my hand, and your brain kind of puts it all together and says, oh, that is your hand. That's a bottom-up processing. And it's sometimes called feature detection theory, partially because, or mostly because, feature detectors are parts of your brain. They are things or parts of your brain that respond to specific types of stimuli. In other words, there are parts of your brain that correspond to curves, parts of your brain that correspond or that respond specifically to lines. And so those parts of the brain activation put together say, hey, this is the object that we are seeing. So that makes for putting with the details, starting with the details, and then working up to the actual element itself. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, I didn't have to do bottom-up processing to see your hand. I knew this was your hand. Well, that is true. The truth of the matter is, and this is one of those things in psychology. Here's a little thing about psychology. There are two answers to just about every question in psychology. One is it depends, and the other one is both. And in this case, the question is, which one's right, or which one do we do more of? Bottom-up or top-down processing? The answer is both. We do both. In other words, when I say look at my hand, you're doing top-down and bottom-up processing at the same time. So we tend to do both. So again, top-down, you see the whole image, and then you start analyzing the details. Whereas bottom-up is you analyze the details, the elements to it, and you come to this rousing conclusion that this is what it is or I'm seeing. Well, that's what I'm seeing. So again, if something's not clear, if something's not sure, put it in the chat, or you can ask a question. Totally up to you. So, and to kind of illustrate this idea, okay, this is a very famous reversible figure. Has anyone ever seen this one before? Has anyone ever seen? It's a very famous illusion. So it's a two-way illusion, or two-way figure, I should say. The way this works is this. Some people see a picture of an old lady, and some people see a picture of a young lady. Now, some immediately will see both, but can one see one but not the other? If anyone wants to chime in, what do you see? Okay, so let me just put the question here. What do you see? Okay, so question there, what do you see in this picture here? Okay, what do you see? Do you see a young lady? Do you see an old lady? What exactly do you see here? Okay, so one sees a young lady, one sees both. Okay, so some say both. And by the way, you look at it long enough, you will see both. You'll kind of figure out which one's which, or how you can see both. So let's see the young lady. Okay, so the young lady is kind of looking off behind her. This is her necklace. This is her neckline. This is her her jawline. Okay, that's her ear. You saw that lady immediately. That's a top-down process. We'll call that a top-down process for the sake of discussion here. But now I say, but there's also an old woman in there too. And you say, well, how do I see the old lady? Well, in this case, we're going to have to do some bottom-up processing here. So, all right. And by the way, when you never seen this for the first, if this is the first time you've ever seen this, and you see one but not the other, when you see that other, that's when your mind can be blown. So, all right. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to describe this instead of a young lady. It's an old woman who is kind of looking down this way, not behind, but downwards. And this is her chin. It's a very big chin, okay? And this is her mouth slightly open. And this is a big nose right here. I realize that you can't actually see my cursor, so I'm not sure why I'm trying to point it out here. But basically, the young lady's necklace is the old lady's mouth. Her neckline is the old lady's chin. The young lady's jawline is a big nose. And the young lady's ear is the old lady's eye. Now, hopefully by now, if you saw one but not the other, please let me know so that I know that there's a yaha or an aha moment or a eureka moment here. Because when you finally see that that old lady, or should I say that young lady, you saw one but not the other, but when you finally see the other, oh my gosh, now I see it. I have this poster in my classroom. And I've had students. I don't talk about it until maybe, like I said, November, December. And we this year we started the last week in August. And I've had students spontaneously, like this week or last week, say, "Oh, I see it now. I see it now." It took them some time to figure it out. But so when you see one immediately, that's a top-down process. When you have to figure out the other one, and that happens for some people, and has nothing to do with intelligence or anything like that, that is a bottom-up process. Okay, so that's just kind of a demonstration of that, differentiating one from the other, how you might have to do one from the other. Here's another fun too. This one's I saw on Twitter, I think 2 years ago. This is actually a manger scene. During the Christmas holiday, you might see people put mangers or a manger in their front yard, and this is like a two-dimensional figure. And it's two people praying over a manger. And you might say, okay, is it a manger? Or is it two angry dinosaurs kind of looking up towards the sky? Again, if you saw one but not the other, the one that you saw was top down. The one you have to figure out is bottom up. And again, if you look for this, if you do like Google dinosaurs and dinosaur manger or something like that, you'll see this image here. Again, that's an example of a top-down versus bottom-up processing. Again, let me just remind you, questions, they're not sure of something, please speak out so that I can answer them. That's very important. Another example, I guess I'm getting a little kind of jumping ahead here a little bit, but this is a two-way figure. Okay, two-way figures, they essentially, this could be a trophy, or this could be two faces, or a vase, or two faces. When you see one, okay, you're kind of doing a top down. But now to kind of see the other, someone would argue that you might have to do a bit of a bottom up in order to see the other. Now, this would be a very quick process, but one that happens very, very, very quickly. So, see it here in the chat. Yes, it's a very well-known illusion here. And the idea here is that you can see a vase in the foreground, and the black would be the background in this case. So if you see the vase is in the foreground. and the black is in the background. Now, if you see two faces, the two faces are in the foreground, and the white is in the background. Of course, I'd like to joke to my students, I see it as two faces kissing a vase, and suddenly you can see it at the same time. But again, it's which one are you seeing? That's your top down. If you have to kind of work to see the other, it's bottom up. Okay. Now, I am going to say this. You're going to see this next slide has kind of a strobe effect a little bit here. So in case you're sensitive to that, just want to make sure you know about that. But it's nothing surprising. There's nothing that's going to jump out at you. It's just dots that kind of go in and out here, as you're going to see. So we're going to move on to another concept here. It's called the Phi Phenomenon. Okay, the Phi Phenomenon. Now, the Phi Phenomenon, and if it looks weird on your screen, I got happening 3 times at once here on my screen. So the Phi Phenomenon, it appears, now there's actually a classic original description of the Phi Phenomenon, and there's how textbooks describe it. I'm going to tell you about more the how we kind of think of it today. The Phi Phenomenon is this illusion of movement. When something appears and disappears, it gives the illusion of movement. So here you have, it seems like a white circle that's moving in a counterclockwise fashion here, and it looks, wow, it's, this circle's moving. Well, it's not. There's nothing really moving per se. It's just one dot after another, appearing and disappearing. So basically, there are 8 dots in this little circular setup here, and only 7 are showing at a time. Well, one disappears, and then as that reappears, the next one next to it, going counterclockwise, disappears. And this keeps going in this direction here to kind of give it the impression that there is this circular movement, when in fact, again, there is none. So this is the Phi Phenomenon. Sometimes you might see those illuminated open signs at a restaurant, and it says open, and maybe you might have these little lights that looks like a person's waving. It's like this really big open sign, it's with little lights, and looks like they are waving. Well, there's nothing actually waving. It's just these little tiny lights going on and off in a certain fashion that makes it look like that there is actual movement going on. As an extension, if you've ever played with a flip book is not quite the Phi Phenomenon, but I think it's called, there's a name for it, but I don't think they ever tested you on the AP exam. But you flip one image, then you show another image that's slightly different, and then a third image that's slightly different from the second one, and it gives them illusion of movement. Not quite the Phi Phenomenon, although some textbooks kind of teach it as the same thing. So that is the Phi Phenomenon. All right, now this is something that works in my classroom, but isn't going to work so well here because I can't divide up the class here. But I might ask my class, I might ask half of them to close their eyes while the other half is asked to write down what they see here. Okay, and so what you should see is, it looks like the first letters of the alphabet, ABC, and they would write down ABC. And I'd say, okay, thank you, now close your eyes. And the other side is now going to put up their heads, and they put up their heads. And I say, okay, I then change the slide, and I say, tell me what you see here. And they usually write down 12, 13, and 14, the numbers 12, 13, and 14. And okay, that makes sense. And then I say, okay, let's debrief. Everyone put your heads up. And you can see that the ABC in the 12, 13, 14 used the same exact figure for the B and 13. So here you have 13, which is like the 12, 13, 14. We see 13 when, I'm going to go back here, we see 13 when it's with 12 and 14. We more readily see this as a 13 here. But that very same figure, that very same object, we are more likely to see as a B when it's with A, B, and C. Now, of course, you might say, well, now I've seen both, I can kind of see it both ways. Understood. But nevertheless, depending upon how the context of it is presented to you, okay, might lead you to perceive something in a particular way, which is what the definition of a perceptual set is. It's the readiness to see something in a particular way given how it's presented to you, especially in context with other objects around it. So in other words, to kind of simplify that, this weird looking thing in the middle might look like a 13 when it's presented with 12 and 14. However, when presented with A and C, it appears to be more of a B. So again, how we might perceive something depends upon how it's being presented to you. That is a perceptual set. Something like if I take a certain shade of green, okay, next time I might make a slide like this, I might give you a certain shade of green, and I say, how dark of a green color is it? Well, if I present that green color next to a light shade of green, you might say that's a kind of a darkish shade of green. But if I take that same shade of green and I present it with a very dark shade of green next to it, then you might say, well, it's a kind of a lighter shade of green. It looks kind of light. Again, same shade of green, but how it's being presented against something else makes you want to see it in a particular way, either lighter or darker. So that's the perceptual set. Subjective contours. This is actually very similar to the Neckar cube I started with in this presentation. But again, I say, okay, what shapes do you see here? Okay, what shapes do you see here? And what are you, from a top-down perspective, what would you readily say? What do you see here? So just put the question here. What do you see or supposed to see? What do you think? Okay. Circle and triangle, right? We're supposed to see a circle and triangle. And, that's why I see two. Obviously, there is, when you look at, let's do a bottom-up analysis of this, there is no triangle and there is no circle. What you have on the left-hand side are four rectangles, sort of, each side with a kind of a curved end to it, one of the sides being curved. And then you have this other one, these three kind of Pac-Man looking things facing one another that kind of gives us the impression of a triangle when in fact there is no triangle. So contours, it's a way of saying edges in a way. We see contours, we see edges, we see shapes when there is no shape, where we don't see any particular shape. We don't see anything, as it were. Well, instead we kind of led to see these things based upon the way the elements are set up. So that are subjective contours. Okay, another concept in perception. And again, a lot of this is in a way vocabulary. But here, this is a very well-known image. It's available easily online. It's called the Gestalt Principles. Okay, Gestalt Principles. When we talk about Gestalt is a perspective in psychology. It was actually one of the early practices of psychology. You often hear about the psychoanalytic view or the psychodynamic view. You hear about structuralism and functionalism in terms of the history of psychology. The Gestalt movement was, it's taken various forms today, but it began largely as at least for our purposes, as a perceptual movement in psychology, how we perceive things. The Gestalt's the German word for whole or image. And the phrase we often use with it is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. In other words, we have a tendency to see wholes, we tend to see images when in fact they don't really exist. So for example, here I have an example of this is closure. Closure is where our brain kind of closes or completes an image when in fact there is nothing to complete. We see here the first letter of Gestalt, the letter G. It looks like it closes to a G. Our brain tells us it's a G, but when you look at it very carefully, again, do a bottom-up analysis of this, there is no actual G here. It's just a series of lines, or it's a series of curves and whatever that kind of makes it look like it's a G, but in fact there is no G, but our brain is closing it for us. The second one is proximity. Things that tend to be close together are kind of put together. So in other words, the little squares here in the letter E in this Gestalt are because they're so close together, our brain wants to put them together. You see, technically, what you have is a field of gray and black squares, but what our brain is doing is says, well, wait a minute, you know what? The ones that are closest together, we're going to put together. Is this also uh, kind of kind of goes along with this idea of similarity, which is actually later on in this particular image here, but because things that are the same, in this case, color, we kind of put together. But here with proximity, okay, you know what? The things that are closest together, because these black squares are close together compared to the gray squares, we kind of group the black squares together and as one thing, and the gray squares together as something else, and we very readily see an E, when in fact, there is no letter E there. Now, with continuation, okay, we see a letter S. Now, this S, again, really is not a complete S, because when you look at the middle of the S, you see that the S is kind of cut off by this kind of white stick, I guess, or something like that, and the S is not complete. So that if you were actually to draw the elements of the black part of that, what's supposed to be an S, you can see it doesn't make an S. It's like two shapes here. But your brain, again, puts it together. It continues the element. It can kind of continues the shape here, and your brain says it's an S. As a matter of fact, it's so strong, it's pretty hard. You have to try really hard. You have to do some serious bottom-up processing not to see the S. That is, again, pretty difficult. Your brain is so readily seeing this as a letter S. With similarity, here you have two images that look very much alike, and if they look very much alike, we kind of put them together. In other words, so the fact that this is a T, we kind of see this as a T due to some other Gestalt principles, we will also very likely see this as a T as well. Because we both see them the same way, because they're so similar, we say, you know what, they must be the same thing. That's Gestalt, or I'm sorry, the Gestalt principle of similarity. With the figure ground, okay, look at the A, okay. Now, because we see it as kind of like the black elements are the letters and they make up the letters, we kind of see that as the foreground. We see that as the figure in this case. And the white is the background. The white is in the back. Now, granted, we could say, well, if we look at it kind of carefully, it looks like a tree, a white tree against a black background. But again, because we have learned, or we have perceived based upon our perception of these other things here, that, hey, the black are the letters, we are more readily seeing, in this case, the black being the figure and the white being the background in this case. Now, I'll tell you this much, that they have had questions in the past about Gestalt principles, and it seems like, well, I kind of know what it is just by knowing the word. That's true, but sometimes they might they might put it on there and it seems a little trickier than it needs to be. So it might say on an FRQ, the football player was looking at the defensive formation, saw the players line up, but the referee kind of stood in front of two of the players and you couldn't see the two players. And you might say, well, the football player was able to perceive still a continuous line of players being lined up because his brain put together through the Gestalt principle of continuity or continuation this line. Again, that sounds a lot more complicated than it should be. It's not. I didn't explain as well, but it's kind of like saying we see this S, even though it doesn't continue, our brain continues it for us. Again, you add up the two parts, it doesn't make an S. But for us, the whole, we see a letter S. It's greater than the sum of its parts. That's where we get Gestalt from. Okay. So again, if you have questions, please make sure you ask them. You can either ask them in the question prompt or ask in the chat. That's fine. I'm skipping that next one because it's actually repeating the same concept of Gestalt principles. So now I want to get into principles of depth perception. And what's unfortunate about streaming this unit is that sensation and perception has a lot of literal hands-on activities, and like viewing three-dimensional objects with two-dimensional images and things like that, like using a viewfinder to see three-dimensional objects. It's really neat, but unfortunately, I don't get as much here because, again, it's just a streaming thing that we do here. You can't quite get as much from it. So what I have here, so I'm going to describe these things as best I can. How is it that we're able to perceive depth? Like, how is it that we are able to actually see what's far away and what's close? Well, our brain has different strategies. And when we see things that are near versus what they're far, well, sometimes our brain is doing, it's judging it based upon our experiences, and sometimes it's actually using our eyes in a certain way, assuming we have both eyes functionable, to make judgments based upon actual biological sensation and then an interpretation of that. What do I mean by that? Well, first, let's talk about binocular depth cues. Binocular depth cues are ways of seeing depth, ways of judging depth that require two eyes. In other words, both eyes. You need both eyes to use these cues to perceive depth. You can still perceive depth with just one eye, which we'll talk about a little later on, but in terms of seeing depth, seeing an object far versus close, this is something that requires both eyes. So here I have a picture of the White House. And if you look at it, you'll see that they're very, very close together in terms of what they are. It is indeed the White House. But if you look carefully, you'll see that the left picture and the right picture are different a little bit, okay? So if you look at it very closely, you'll see that you see kind of more of the right, what's to the right of the White House in the left picture. And in the right picture, you see a little bit more of what's to the left of the White House. So, and obviously you might say, well, it's just the White House, and that's true. But what this kind of represents, or what I'm trying to represent here, is what the left eye sees and what the right eye sees are different, slightly different. And if you want to try, just to kind of illustrate this, that your left eye and right eye see something very different, here's a neat activity that you can do. Put your finger in front of your face, okay, with one eye open. Make a note of where your finger is in your visual field. So with one eye open, the other eye closed or covered or whatever, you look at your finger and you make a note of where your finger is in your visual field. Now switch eyes. Okay, when you switch eyes, you realize your finger is in a different part of your visual field. It's in a different part of your visual field that, even though you would say, well, gosh, it didn't actually move. No, it's just that your eyes are seeing different things. Now, here's where it gets kind of interesting. You see, if I have it up close and I do, I switch back and forth, you'll see that my finger jumps quite a bit. However, if I move my finger out here and I do it, okay, same thing where I'm opening and closing each eye, I'll find that my finger still moves, but less so. In other words, the difference between what each eye sees far away is less than when it's up close. And if I had some object that's like across the room, the difference would be even slighter. You see, what we're talking about here is the difference between what the left eye sees and what the right eye sees. And put another way, the difference between what the left retina senses and what the right retina senses. And we can use this word difference, but another word for difference is disparity. What is the disparity, the difference? What is the disparity between what the left retina sees and the right retina sees? And so that's what it's called, retinal disparity. And because we see here, or hopefully we do see, or we do notice that, my finger's up close, there's a great retinal disparity, great difference between what each eye sees. And when it's farther away, there's less retinal disparity. When it's farther away, we can come up with this particular conclusion. The greater the retinal disparity, the closer an object is to us, or that we see it as. The greater the retinal disparity, the greater the difference between what each eye sees, the closer the object is to us. So retinal disparity, again, you need both eyes to have retinal disparity. Because if you only have one eye, if a person only has one eye, well, there can't be a difference between what each retina sees because there's only one retina in play here. So that's a binocular depth cue, retinal disparity. A second type of binocular depth cue is called convergence. Now, this is not the greatest picture in the world here, but here we are looking at a face. And the face happens to be looking at an object that's far, far away. Now, what happens to the eyes if an object draws closer? Now, this is something I would do with my students in class, and I'd say, look at something, look at a finger, and then move the finger close to your face. Actually, you can even try it. If you have your finger out, right here, let's say, okay, my finger out here, and if I draw my finger closer, and I want to keep looking at my finger, what do the eyes do? Well, let's see if you can put that in the chat. What do the eyes do as an object draws closer? Let's see if anybody has an answer here. What would the eyes do if the eyes are looking at an object and it's getting closer and closer to the face? What do you think would happen? What do you think would happen? See if anyone has an idea. What do you think would happen in this case here? If you look in the mirror, well, it'd be hard to look in the mirror and do it at the same time. Pupils, they wouldn't dilate necessarily. They would have a major change, okay? They keep focusing on the object, but what happens to the eyes themselves in terms of, I should say, let's put it this way, what happens to the pupils? They don't dilate, okay? That's correct. Catherine has it correct. They move inwards, okay? So, I'm going to move very close here to my screen here. It might look a little weird, but okay. So here I am staring at my finger, and I'm going to move it closer, okay? Notice what happens to my eyes when my finger gets closer. My eyes move inwards, okay? And that's exactly what happens here. My eyes begin to converge. In other words, they start to literally just move closer to one another. And, it might look something like this. Okay, it might look something like this. And in this case, your eyes are converging, your pupils are converging. They're moving inwards. And now that's not just a fun little curiosity, because what happens is that the sensory receptors in your eyes are picking up on this and saying, wait a minute, there's movement by both eyes moving inwards, and that tells my brain, hey, there's an object that's moving closer. So there's actually something neurological going on here as well when this happens. When there's convergence, the eyes, the muscles of the eyes, or that control the eyes, are going to my brain saying, hey, an object is moving closer. So that's convergence. So those are two binocular depth cues that we often talk about in AP Psych. There might be other ones, but as far as I know, those are the two ones, the two major ones. If there's anything else, it'd be news to me. Not saying there's not, but those are the ones that we often talk about in AP Psych. Now, monocular depth cues are cues that basically strategies of perceiving depth with just one eye. Now, if a person loses their ability to see out of one eye and they only have one eye to see, their depth perception is impaired a bit, but it's not completely gone, because there are certain things that the eye can do, one eye can do, that can perceive depth. Now, if you have both eyes, great, but each eye can still do these individual things to judge depth. And so they are called monocular depth cues. Okay, so binocular, you see binoculars, you put them up to your eyes. That's because there's two lenses there. Monocular, one eye. So one of the things we're going to talk about here is called accommodation. So I had to make this picture here as best I could. This is what we're doing here. In this image, we are looking at the eye from a sideways view here. So here's the outer layer of the eye, the cornea. Here is the pupil. They have green eyes, so it's a green iris. And here's the lens. Okay, obviously this picture is not completely to scale, but it's close enough. The image comes in from the left and projects, and the lens is going to project the image to the retina in the back of the eye. Again, this assumes that you've learned about sensation, because right now we're talking about perception. And so an object that's far away, the lens is a certain shape. The lens is not doing anything special. I mean, it's doing its job. It's projecting the image to the back of the retina, which is great, wonderful. But when an object moves closer, okay, and you can kind of feel this yourself. Like if I close one eye to really make sure I feel this, and I'm looking at the object, you might feel certain pressure. It's not great pressure. It's not amazing. It's not painful, but a certain change in the eye as I focus on it, as I keep focusing on the object. What's happening there is that the lens and the eye actually changes shape. It actually kind of bends a bit to kind of accommodate or to help you see the fact that an object is moving closer. So as an object moves more closely, your lens is changing shape so that it can uh, compensate for the moving object closer so it can see and focus on it better. Now, for those of you who happen to do child development or human development up to this point, this is not the same as Piaget's concept of accommodation. It's a completely different thing, has nothing to do with it. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. You'll learn about that when you get to human development. So that's accommodation. That's a monocular depth cue. Okay. And again, as always, if you have questions, please let me know. Now, these next type of monocular depth cues are sometimes called pictorial depth cues. And they're called pictorial depth cues because, well, you can look at the picture and you're judging the picture. You're looking at all the elements of the picture. You're using your memory. You're using your experiences to judge, okay, this is close and this is far away. The first one we're talking about here is interposition. And by the way, these can make for very easy pickings on a FRQ and say, oh, you know what, let's throw interposition. And if you have no idea what interposition is, or they might say the monocular depth cue of interposition, you might say, oh my gosh, what is that? Again, sometimes AP Psych terminology is just fancy words that are so vague or never used. But interposition basically means when something gets in the way of something else. So again, I don't have a pointer here, so you'll have to bear with me. But I'm looking in the right-hand lane. This is a very busy highway. And I am looking at the, there's a van that's right in front of a diamond, as it were. To the right of that, you'll see what appears to be a white pickup truck. And in front of it appears to be a car, maybe a grayish, bluish color. Now, you know that the white truck is closer to you. Now, how do we know that the white truck is closer to you? Well, one reason why we know it is because the white truck is blocking my view of that, we'll call it a gray car. That white truck is blocking my view of the gray car. And so when one object blocks my view of another object, the object that's doing the blocking is closer, and the object that's being blocked, or partially blocked, I should say, is said to be farther away. That's the concept of interposition. When object A partially blocks the image of the view of object B, or in other words, if object A is blocking my view of object B, I will think that object A is closer and object B is farther away. That is interposition. Now I'm going to use the same picture to talk about this next concept, relative size. Actually, now I could use this same picture to talk about all of the depth cues, but I'm just going to stick to just these ones here. When we talk about relative size, here we can assume that most of these cars are roughly the same size. Obviously, they're not all the same size, but they could definitely vary. And but let's assume that this car and this car, and let's say this car, again, here I'm pointing at stuff and then you can't see it again. It's a hard habit to break here. But if you look at some of the cars towards the front, in the front of the picture, you can see that they're a certain size. But if you were to look at some of the pictures that are in the background, those cars are roughly the same size in real life, but in the picture, they're rather small. What that tells you is this, that when you have two objects that are known to be, relatively speaking, the same size, more or less the same size, but one appears bigger than the other, that one that appears bigger should be closer. Okay, that's relative size. So then, texture gradient. With texture gradient, this is not the greatest picture, but if you can see in the foreground, you can kind of see the texture, the finer details of the dirt better than you can of the dirt that is closer to the sheep. And what that tells you is that, okay, if I can see the fine details, in order for me to see fine details, that something has to be pretty close to me, right? But if it's far away, there's no way I'm going to see the finer details of something. And that's what texture gradient is. Things that we can see, things are closer if we can see the finer details. If we can see detail, it's said to be closer. If it's blurry, if it's not so good, it's farther away. That's texture gradient. Next one is motion parallax. Motion parallax would be helpful if I had an actual moving image here. It's pretty hard to set up with this particular program. But think of it this way. Let's suppose you see, and I have these trail lines, these airplane trail lines, because when an airplane is in the sky, to your view, is it moving slowly or closely? I'm sorry, let me say that again. Slowly or quickly? Does the plane appear to be moving quickly or slowly in the sky? When you see it in the sky, does it appear to be moving slowly or quickly? What would you say? Do airplanes move slowly or quickly to your view? In your view, if they're high up in the sky, do they move slowly or quickly? What would you say? Give you a second there to think about that. So the plane is high up in the sky and it's flying. Does that plane move slowly or quickly? Typically, when it's high up in the sky, it moves pretty slowly. But let's say that plane is flying, that same plane is flying 100 feet above you. It's flying a lot faster, right? Well, is the plane really any faster or slower? Really? No, it's not. I mean, obviously, plane speeds can vary, but when something is moving very, very slowly, we know it's not because it's actually moving slowly, that plane. That plane is moving slowly because it's so high up in the sky. It's so far away from us. But if it moves very quickly, obviously it's close to us. And again, this is in our view, in our perceptual view. And that's what motion parallax is. Things that are moving slowly are perceived to be farther away, whereas things that are moving more quickly are seen to be moving as faster. I'm sorry, moving as more closely to us, they're faster. Okay, so aerial perspective. With the aerial perspective, it's similar to texture gradient in a way, but if something appears to be up towards the top and it appears to be hazy, perhaps, or not so clear, as if it were in the sky, we see it farther away. That's aerial perspective. If it appears to be up in the air, it's probably farther away. That's the essence to aerial perspective. Linear perspective. This is something that we see in art class. You learn about the vanishing point, how to make a vanishing point, how to draw two lines. Because if you drew the lines parallel, suddenly it looks like they're going up. But you have to draw them converging towards a vanishing point to make it look like it's disappearing. And so linear perspective is this. As an object moves closer, more closely to a vanishing point, we see it as being farther away. The further away it is from the vanishing point, the closer we perceive it. So that's linear perspective. In other words, in terms of how the lines converge towards that vanishing point, as it's placed on the vanishing point, how big do we perceive it to be is one thing, but how far away we perceive it to be, it depends upon where it appears on that vanishing point. So in this picture, if something is placed right next to that tree, some object, we know it's pretty close to the vanishing point of the train tracks in this case. I say it's far away. But if it appears to be not close to those trees and it's actually towards the pavement in the foreground, obviously, that would be close together, or I should say closer to us. That's what linear perspective tells us. And I kind of want to give you an appreciation of linear perspective, because with linear perspective, that was actually one of the inventions, if you will, of the Renaissance, or the Renaissance, it depends on the pronunciation. But take, for example, this famous picture of the Last Supper. We actually see elements of the vanishing point here. You see and towards the upper right-hand side, these windows or doors, whatever, and the top of them sort of slant down towards that theoretical vanishing point, and it gives you a nice perspective of depth. But that wasn't always the case. If you look at Middle Age paintings before, this idea of depth perception or depth of creating depth in art and the linear perspective, it looks something like this, where it didn't, the lines of the table are not parallel to the lines of the top. It looks like it's slanting upwards, again, because they don't have a very good perspective or understanding of linear perspective. And it was the invention of linear perspective where they said, oh, wait a minute, we got to make things look a little bit more, we have to change things to make it look like it has depth. So that's actually a real, giving you appreciation of what the Renaissance did to art, as it were. Finally, this evening, I want to talk about the difference between a distal stimulus and a proximal stimulus. Distal stimulus is the way the image actually takes up space in real life. In other words, the way the stimulus actually is. A distal stimulus is the way it actually is. So let's say you have a square, there's a square on a table, and it's a square in real life. But let's say you're sitting at the table, and if you were to kind of think about it, how is it hitting your eye? Well, it's hitting your eye in a sort of trapezoidal fashion. Now, to kind of give you a perspective of this, something I have my students do, what I do is that sometimes I will have them, take a picture of a piece of paper on their desk with their phone, and I'll ask them to open up Snapchat or some other app where they can trace something, where they can draw with their finger. And I say, now draw the picture, draw or trace the actual paper that is on your screen. And when they do it, you find it is actually kind of trapezoidal. Why? Because the shorter end is farther away from you than the closer end, which seems to be bigger. And it's hitting your eye in that way, the proximal stimulus. Now, what's good to you is that your brain does not actually perceive it as a trapezoid. I mean, you have to kind of sit down and really think about this in a way where you realize, oh my gosh, it's a trapezoid. Okay, when in fact your brain says no, it's a square. You see, what's happening here is that your brain says, wait a minute, it's a square. If you move farther away, the proximal stimulus actually becomes more of a trapezoid, but your brain says, no, it's still a square. Take a picture of a piece of paper, let's say blue paper or green paper, and with the lights on, and then you turn the lights down and take a picture again, you realize the picture has changed. The color has changed, the way it actually appears. Okay, that cough was my son William, who's over here right now, off camera. But you know what? Your brain says, you know what? No, it's the color is constant. The color is still constant. It hasn't changed. It has not changed. It's color constancy. So, and also think about your finger. Okay, here I have my finger. It takes up so much space of my perceptual field, of my visual field, but as it moves closer, it actually takes up more space. The proximal stimulus grows. Has the distal stimulus, namely my finger, has it actually grown? The answer is no, it has not. No, it has not. My brain says, no, it's still the same size. It has size constancy. Okay, and so we have perceptual constancy is not perceiving, or I should say perceiving the same thing, even though the proximal stimulus might change. Still perceiving the distal stimulus the way it should be, even though the proximal stimulus, the way it hits your retina, is actually going to change. Not now, William, a little bit. Wait just a bit. Okay, so that's the difference between the proximal stimulus and the distal stimulus and the way things change. Our brain still keeps it as the same way. So with that, are there any questions I can answer for you? Are there any questions I can answer for you? Things you want me to go over, things you want me to elaborate a little bit more, maybe some other topic relating to perception that I can go over quite quickly. Because again, it's a huge unit, and you could probably do about 4 or 5 streams. So vision is between ganglion and bipolar cells. So it's actually under the sensation unit. So in the retina, the thing I tell my students is this: what's the order? So light hits the rods and the cones, and basically you just have to remember the order. rods, cones, then bipolar cells, and then ganglion cells. And the ganglion cells kind of all converge at that optic disc. So with that, how do you remember it? The way I kind of teach it is this, is that you have your rods and cones here, you have your ganglion cells here, and you have these bipolar cells, bipolar, two poles, one pole being your rods and cones, the other pole being your ganglion cells. And so it's kind of the bipolar cells that kind of have both poles on each end. That's how I tell my students to remember. That's all I ever cover with respect to that. Again, if you get into optometry or if you ever get into the science of vision, it gets a lot more complicated than that. But that's as far as AP Psych goes here. So I hope that answers the question. And again, I do recommend, I think it was Megan Ravello who did the sensation unit. Not sure if she did, but I think it was her. I don't know if I'm wrong. I apologize for that, but I think it's covered in that particular stream. Any other questions relating to perception that could be answered? So, like I said, it's a huge unit, and it's going to be one of those things, I think, as we get closer to the AP exam and we start doing our review streams, you might have more questions about it, and that's perfectly fine. Like I said, it can be a little daunting at times, but it is, but still, again, it's just, knowing concepts, not many processes, more just knowing the terms and what they mean. So, any other questions I can answer? Anything else? Like I said, I like questions. I do like having questions, and I like answering them. Well, all right. So if there are no other questions, then I will wrap it up for this evening. I thank you very much for your attention, your questions. Oh, wait, we got one more. Illusion with the dots. Which illusion with the dots? Which illusion with the dots are we talking about here? There's many illusions with dots. What do we see here? Oh, so the one from earlier, you mean? Talking about, let's see here. Oh. This one here? So I'm not sure which one you're talking. Okay. Oh, is it where it's like a black? So it looks like there's black dots, but in fact there are no black dots. Okay, so that's again part of the sensation unit, the sensation part of this. I'll let my other son Andrew. So walk away. I'm trying to finish up here.
Is it almost done?
No, it's not almost done. I'll be up soon, Andrew. So let me get out of this because I know it could be. So that's lateral antagonism. Lateral antagonism is where this is where it's really hard to explain without additional visuals, but it kind of works like this. When receptive fields in your retina, again, I am really, really oversimplifying this here, are stimulated. That inhibits neighboring receptive fields. So when a black dot, let's say, hits one part of my retina, the immediate surrounding areas are not going to quite see as well. So let's say it's a black dot amongst a white background. What happens is that black dot kind of hurts my ability to see the white area immediately surrounding the black dot. It's very, very hard to actually pick up on that by itself. You kind of have to know what to look for in this case. So in that particular, I think it's called, maybe is it the herring illusion? I can't remember what it was named offhand, but if I don't have it in front of me, it's hard to remember. Obviously, it's easy to remember having it in front of you. But so what happens with those illusions is that you might have, let's say, 4 black dots or 4 black, let's say, squares. And it's like a white lines kind of separating them. But you have a quarter of a black square, quarter of a black square, quarter of a black square, quarter of a black square in this white field. Well, those 4 black areas are hurting your ability, sort of, I say hurt, I mean it's harming you, but it's hurting your ability to see that white field. So, and this really works when you're perfect, because when you're looking at it straight on, your cones can see it, and it's not really a big deal. Well, I should say, when you're looking at it, you have real acuity because your cones are picking up on it, and it's not a big deal. But when it's in your periphery, it's your ability to see white isn't as easy to do, because you have those 4 little angles, those 4 little points of the squares affecting your ability to see white. And so a black dot or a grayish or darkish area starts to appear. You look back at it, well, it disappears because there's no lateral antagonism, not one that you can actually pick up on. And again, there's some details to that I'm kind of glossing over or missing out on. But that's essentially why that works. It's a concept called lateral antagonism. And it kind of goes, if you look it up, there'll be some other stuff on there. I'm not sure if we have resources on that, so you're welcome. I hope that did help. Like I said, it's very hard to explain with no visuals whatsoever. All right.